get a little bit further, I think we got the picture about the difference between education and schooling and this other thing, lifelong learning. But what I'm curious about is, particularly in the context of a summit like this, is what is the cultural context? Is there a cultural context to lifelong learning? And I know that Ruth and also Rosa, you've looked at sort of knowledge-based aid to communities from a perspective of the impact, of both positive and negative. I wonder whether you could expand on that, Ruth, when you've been reaching the indigenous populations and the impact on culture. What are you exporting, or what has been exported? What are the cultural issues that we must be aware of when we're putting lifelong learning into other communities?
What we've found to be very important, the work that we've done, is that to recognise, we're doing a lot of work in adult education in remote communities, and to understand what work might be in those communities might mean actually saying, what is work and how does it function here? Is it going to be exactly the same as this job is operated as a health worker or a teacher? Is that exactly the same as it might be done in a major city? Or is it actually going to function differently here because that person has a cultural as well as a social responsibility to this community? Often people who are senior people in work and in learning also have very high cultural responsibilities and for how their knowledge is managed. So for us, it's been about thinking about getting beyond a very thin view of what education is for that workplace. So how do I do my job and what skills do I need to do my job? In this place, I don't just need to know how to be a good teacher and how learning functions and how schools function, but I also need to know how do the cultural elements impact on the way that we might do that work. How do we bring culture into the curriculum? How do we work with cultural events that are going on in the community? So rather than seeing cultural knowledge as a deficit, it's actually an integral part of learning. And we've found that multimedia has been really important for that because we can actually represent knowledge in different ways. It doesn't have to be represented on a white piece of paper in a linear fashion that goes down the page. We can actually represent knowledge through layers. We can have shape and colour. We can have a space to negotiate knowledge when you're working across many languages, and we usually are. English is often the people's fifth or sixth language. So if you want to negotiate different ways of talking about culture and how that works within a workforce or how then it works back with the school, having things like iPads and multimedia means we can say, no, I don't mean that, I mean like this. You don't have to have all the words to describe it. And it means that we can organise knowledge in different ways. A strong example has been in the science work that we've done for environmental work for land management, which is a huge opportunity for Aboriginal people in community because that's a cultural work as well as economic work. And it also then fits back into the curriculum. What's an Aboriginal view of science and what's a Western view of science? How do we bring those together and negotiate that so students learn both? And who should be the authority in that space? Being able to use multimedia means we can represent that knowledge in a whole lot of different ways and have a space to talk about it. It's one thing to say, yes, there are two ways of knowing this. The real hard work is to get in the guts of it and negotiate it and to co-produce, as Francois has already said, new forms of understanding that knowledge. And for us, the key thing then is we understand the how of learning, the how of negotiating that knowledge, the how that knowledge is authorised, who is meant to speak on it and why, and how do we live in a world that brings together those two different cultures.
Do you think that we've seen in some very well-intentioned programs, I mean, I've talked about the big international agencies and NGOs and so on, but I mean, is there a danger that we're sort of seeing a sort of educational colonialism emerging? Is it a fair point, Ruth or Rosa or Francois? Rosa.
Educational colonialism has been there for ages, continues to be there, and I think the expansion of ICTs is contributing to strengthen something which I call the banking education model. Paulo Freire, we're proud of being Latin Americans, among others, because of Paulo Freire. He's for us a reference, an important reference. Transformative educator. He wanted to do education in order to change society. And, well, Paulo Freire was very critical of something he called the banking education model, which is the teacher knows everything and the learners know nothing. So it's a matter of just depositing a check like you do in a bank. Well, this kind of model has been criticized for being the typical classroom education model in schools. What we see today is the globalization of this kind of model. Now we have global teachers, and the rest of mankind, we are all passive learners. We consume what others produce. And again, I think in terms of the North-South relationship, which can be very asymmetrical. Cooperation is seen as a North-South unidirectional kind of thing. It's never seen as a South-North kind of thing. I'm here as a speaker, and I think as myself, many of us have many things to learn, to teach to the North and to share with the North. However, the cooperation model has always been North-South. The knowledge is in the North and the non-knowledge is in the South. Well, we're very critical of that kind of thing, and that reproduces this banking model at a global scale. It's also banking because it comes from the banks, and the major actor behind this banking education model is in fact the World Bank. The World Bank decided that it's a knowledge bank. Banks are supposed to give loans and try to recover them. But this is a bank that decided to be a knowledge bank. And they decided that they already have all the knowledge that we need in order for us to make sure we develop. So there's the knowledge already. It's already there. It's packed. And all we have to do in the South, so-called developing countries, many of us are not developing at all, or are not even using the term, we are supposed to be trained and informed. That's all. That's our role. It's not even producing knowledge. When it comes to developing countries, the word that the World Bank uses is wisdom. It's local wisdom. That's what we have. That's what we are acknowledged. It's local wisdom. They have the real knowledge, the global one. Well, we question that kind of model, and I think lifelong learning is also a way of saying no to that kind of banking model.
Francois.
I think the banking model is completely flawed, and I'll give a completely different perspective on this, because we completely agree. If I give you money, then I don't have it. But if I give you knowledge, then I still have it. You know, that's an obvious difference that makes the two systems completely different. Okay, and then you can produce knowledge. Okay, unless you are a state, you cannot produce money, and even in the EU we cannot produce money anymore. Okay, so knowledge is very different from money. So the banking assumption doesn't make sense. Okay, that's as simple as this. Okay, so what's interesting is that in fact there is fantastic innovations happening throughout the world, in India, in Africa, in Latin America. I'll just give two examples that Rosa must know. For instance, Vicky Kolber has invented a model where the children are co-constructors of knowledge that are locally relevant, and they are using some of the global knowledge that is accessible, like mathematics and reading and writing, and are being empowered by this knowledge to create new knowledge and to act upon their communities. Okay, so that's a very different model. Okay, Rodrigo Baggio in Brazil, as is one of both of them are awardees of WISE, has created. He went to the favelas and he's empowered the people with the technologies, allowing them to learn relevant skills that allow them to get jobs and to help their families and their community to be empowered and to act upon their environment. Okay, that's what knowledge is about. It's something that is useful. Okay, I can give you another example. T.S. Eliot, okay, wrote something beautiful when he was saying, where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge, and where is the knowledge we have lost in information? Today you could add, where is the information we've lost in the data? Okay, and we are flooded by data and flooded by information, and it's very hard for us to make any sense and gain any knowledge given all this flux, and much less wisdom. Okay, we have to reinvent things. I mean, the education should be about creating. How do you go from data to information? How do you go from information to knowledge? And how can you try to go from knowledge to wisdom? And can we have an emerging wisdom thanks to this process? I'll just give you an example because I'm a French citizen, and France has a fantastic technology that many of you probably envy. Okay, you know, there was Chernobyl a few years ago, and there was a radioactive cloud that came all over Europe, but the French technology blocked it over the frontier. Also, the French state declared. Okay? So that's the sort of fantastic technology we have in France. We can, you know, block nature and tell it what to do. And, you know, a few months ago, we had the drama in Fukushima. And again, we had a big cloud. Okay? What should we think about this? Okay? So I'll tell you about, you know, people learning anywhere, anytime about relevant things for them. Okay? So some Japanese citizens have built themselves Geiger counter, okay, thanks to technologies that were spreading through the web. Okay? And they were measuring the data, whether it was radioactive or not, whether it was safe or not to give to their children. So they had this data, but then they wanted the information. Is this data above the threshold of what's safe or not? And then, you know, they could compare this, and then they had the knowledge about what they should give to it or not. Okay? And then the wisdom comes about, you know, let's debate whether we want nuclear energy or other forms of energy. Okay? And that's where, you know, you can rebuild things. But you have to empower people so that they understand how to produce data, what this data means in terms of information, what is relevant knowledge that they can take from this, and, you know, what's the collective wisdom that can emerge.